Some of the people you have loved are still beside you. Others slipped past you so quietly you barely saw them go. The question of why is one of the oldest questions a heart can carry. Tonight you are going to hear about a dying man and the friend who came to him at the end. A king and queen at dawn discovering something they never expected, and a stranger who walked into the grove with hatred ready in his hands. So let your shoulders fall away from your ears for a moment. Let the weight of the day come down through your back into whatever is holding you. The breath does not need to be deep, only allowed. What you will hear are real human lives, recorded by people who were there. An elephant tending a Buddha who walked away from a quarrel he could not fix. A piece of cloth darkening in the hand of a monk who could not remember a single verse. Each one knows something about the people who came and went from their life, and each one is going to tell you what they learned. So settle in wherever you are. If you would like to share where in the world you are listening from tonight, the comments are a warm place for that. There is a house in the city of Savatthi where a man is dying. The lamps are still lit even in daylight, because the curtains have been drawn against the noise of the street. Servants move quietly between rooms. Family members sit just outside, not wanting to disturb him, not knowing how to be useful. The man lying inside has given more to the Buddha's community than any other layperson in the city, perhaps more than any other layperson in the country. He was born with a different name, Sudatta, a merchant's name, a name his father gave him, a name that meant well given. But he became known by another name almost as soon as he was old enough to make his own choices. When he learned that there were people in the city with no one to feed them, he began feeding them. Every day, at his own gate, bowls of rice for whoever came. The street took notice. The street gave him the name Anathapindika, the one who feeds the helpless. The same instinct, later in life, sent him looking for something he had heard about while traveling on business. A teacher, people said, who knew how the heart actually worked. When Anathapindika finally found the Buddha, sitting in the cool of the morning in a forest grove, he understood almost at once that he had found the thing he had been looking for without knowing he was looking. He invited the Buddha to come and stay in Savatthi. He went home and looked for the right grove of trees. The one he wanted belonged to a prince who did not want to sell. So Anathapindika took every gold coin from his treasury, covered the ground with the coins, and bought the grove for the cost of its weight in gold. He gave the grove to the Buddha and his monks. The Jetta's grove, the place where so many of the teachings would be spoken, existed because Anathapindika could not stand the thought of his teacher having nowhere quiet to sit. Now, many years later, the man who fed the helpless is the helpless one. The pain is severe. It comes in waves through the body, and between the waves there is only the awareness that the next one is coming. He has been alone with this for several days. The family knows he is sick. They do not know the texture of what he is carrying. They cannot. The body is the one place no one else can come into. Between the waves, there are minutes when the breath returns to its normal rhythm and he can feel the cool of the cloth against his skin. Then the next wave starts to gather and he can feel it building before it arrives. He has begun to know its rhythm the way a sailor knows the sea. He has tried to bear it without sending word to anyone. Householders are supposed to manage their own dying with the help of their family and a physician. The deeper teachings, by custom, are reserved for those who have gone forth into the community. But there is an hour in every life when something else is needed, and Anathapindika has come to that hour now. He calls a servant to his bedside. The servant kneels beside him, waiting. "Go to the Blessed One," Anathapindika says, "and pay homage with my forehead at his feet. Tell him that Anathapindika is sick, in pain, gravely ill. And then go to the Venerable Sariputta. Pay homage to him also. Tell him that Anathapindika is sick and ask him, if he would, to come." The servant goes. The Buddha is told. Sariputta is told. The two of them have known Anathapindika for a long time. They know what he has done for the community. They know what kind of man he is. Sariputta puts on his outer robe, takes his bowl, and asks Ananda to come with him. The two of them walk through the city in the middle of the day, past the markets, past the wells, to the house where the lamps are still burning. When they arrive, Sariputta enters the room where Anathapindika is lying. He sits down on a seat that has been placed for him, close enough that the dying man can hear him without straining. Then he speaks, and his first words are what any old friend would ask first. "How is it with you, householder?" he says. "Is the pain bearable? Is it growing worse, or is it easing?" Anathapindika answers him honestly. The pain is not bearable. It is getting worse. Like someone is splitting his head open with a sharp blade. Like a strap of leather is being tightened around his skull until it cracks. Like a knife is being driven up through the soles of his feet. Like there is a fire in his belly that no one can put out. He gives the pain its full description, in his own words, while it is happening. Sariputta lets him speak without interruption. He gives him the room to name the truth of what is happening to his body. When Anathapindika has finished describing it, Sariputta begins to teach. He starts somewhere unexpected. He starts with the eye. "Householder," Sariputta says, "you should train yourself this way. I will not cling to the eye, and there will be no consciousness of mine that depends on the eye." It is a strange place to begin, at first hearing. But listen to what he is saying. The eye that has seen this man's whole life. The eye that watched his children grow. The eye that recognized the Buddha when he first came round to alms in the morning. Sariputta is asking him to begin to loosen his grip on the eye, so that he can let the eye be what it is, an organ that has done its work, separate from the awareness that has used it. Every dying person has to do this anyway. The eye begins to fail. The light dims. The face of a loved one becomes harder to make out. What Sariputta is offering Anathapindika is the chance to release the eye on purpose while there is still time. He is offering him the dignity of doing it himself. Then the ear. I will not cling to the ear, Sariputta says, and there will be no consciousness of mine that depends on the ear. Then the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind itself. Sariputta moves through the 6 senses one by one, giving Anathapindika the same instruction for each. He is moving slowly. He is letting the dying mind hear each instruction and release it before the next one comes. A man who is dying has all the time in the world to be accompanied through the doorway by someone who has walked it many times in his own meditation. There is nothing else worth doing in the room. Then Sariputta begins the same instruction with what each sense touches. What the eye sees, what the ear hears, what the nose smells, what the tongue tastes, what the body feels, what the mind takes hold of. I will not cling, he says again, and there will be no consciousness of mine that depends on these things. Then the consciousness itself, the contact between sense and object, the feelings that arise from contact. Each one of these, the same patient instruction. The dying man is being shown how to release every place where the mind might still try to hold on. Every secret little hand the awareness uses to keep itself attached to the body it is leaving. Then the elements that make up the body itself. Earth in the body, water in the body, fire, air, space, consciousness. I will not cling. Then the 5 things that make up a person: form, feeling, perception, the impulses of the heart, consciousness itself. I will not cling. Then this world, the next world, all that is seen, all that is heard, all that is sensed, all that is thought about, all that is encountered or sought after by the mind. I will not cling. Sariputta is teaching the dying man how to walk through the doorway with his hands open. When Sariputta has finished, Anathapindika is weeping. Tears come from a man who was steady all through the description of the pain. Sariputta sees them. He asks, with great care, whether he is sinking, whether the pain has become worse, or whether something else is happening. Anathapindika gathers himself. I am not sinking, he says. The pain is not worse. But for many years I have attended the Blessed One and the bhikkhus who have trained their minds. I have offered them food. I have built them shelter. I have sat at the edge of the assembly and listened to teaching after teaching. Never have I heard a teaching like this one. Sariputta answers him gently. Such teachings are not usually given to those who live in households. Householder. They are given to those who have gone forth. Anathapindika does not let it pass. He has not lived 80 years and given everything he had to this community to leave a thing like this unsaid at the end. Then let such teachings be given to those who live in households as well. Venerable Sir, there are people of good family with little dust in their eyes who, not hearing the teaching, fall away. But hearing it, they would understand. This is the householder's last great gift to the community. A correction, spoken from the bed where he is dying, that the deepest teachings should reach the lay disciple as well as the monk. The householder, too, may hear them. The householder, too, may need them. Sariputta listens. The two of them sit with him a little longer. Then Sariputta and Ananda rise, bow to him, and go. When they have gone, the room is very quiet. The lamps are still burning. Anathapindika lies there for a while. The teaching is still in him. He is not afraid. The people who love him most are sitting just outside the door, and he is grateful for them. But what is in him at the end is what Sariputta brought. Not long after, Anathapindika dies. That night, in the grove that Anathapindika had once bought from a prince, a light arrives. The Buddha is sitting awake in the open air. The light grows around him, illuminating the trunks of the trees, the paths between them, the space above the ground where there should only be darkness. A figure is standing there. A being from the Tusita realm, the realm of the contented gods, where Anathapindika has just been reborn. The Buddha recognizes the radiance at once. He has had visitors of many kinds. He waits for this one to speak. The Deva approaches the Buddha, bows, stands respectfully at one side, and speaks in verse. The Buddha listens. The other monks who are still awake at the edge of the grove hear it too, a voice they cannot quite locate, the words clearer than any human voice. The verses praise the grove itself. This is the grove, the Deva says, where the king of the teaching dwells. This is the grove where the great disciples walk among the trees. The verses praise the path that has been laid down here. And then the verses praise Sariputta by name for the wisdom and the gentle conduct that brought peace to the dying man's mind. The Deva speaks his praise into the Savatthi night air, bows again, and is gone. In the morning, the Buddha tells Ananda what happened in the night. A Deva came, he says, a Deva who praised this grove and praised Sariputta. Ananda already knows who it must have been. Surely, blessed one, he says, that Deva must have been Anathapindika. He has just died. No other being would think to come back so quickly to honor you and to praise the friend who attended him at the end. The friendship did not stop at the bedside. A long time later, people who have lost someone they loved very much tell us this. The question they keep asking is whether the bond holds. whether the person knew, at the end, how loved they were, whether anything of what was between them survives. What the early Buddhist record gives us here is this image, very carefully recorded by people who were there. A man who was attended all the way to the doorway by a friend who knew exactly what to say. A friendship that the man, in his next moment of being, chose to honor first. Anathapindika is weeping at the end because no one had ever spoken to him this way. For all the years he had fed and sheltered the community, no one had given him a teaching at his own depth. They had treated his generosity as if it were enough. They had been grateful for the gold and the grove and the bowls of rice at the gate. But they had kept the medicine for those who had gone forth. The friend who walks with you to the edge does not protect you from what is true. They are the one who makes sure you hear it, even when no one else thinks you are ready. They give you the teaching at your depth, even at your last hour. And there is something else worth feeling here. Anathapindika needed this teaching the whole time. He needed it as much when he was building shelters and feeding the hungry as he needed it now, lying in his bed. The fact that no one had given it to him while he could still walk to the assembly is its own quiet sorrow. But the friend who came at the end gave it to him then. It was given. The teaching that mattered was placed into the mind that needed it. In the last hour it could be heard. You may already be turning over in your mind which person in your life would come, if it came to it, and stay until the end. You may also be honest, at this hour, about the people you have always assumed would come, and noticing that some of them probably would not. That second list is its own kind of grief. Not everyone is here for the long road. Some are here only for one stretch of it, and one of the oldest awakenings a heart can have is the night it sees this for the first time. He wakes earlier than the others. The lamps are still burning, set in the silver brackets along the walls of the inner chamber. They burn all night because no one in this house has ever needed to count the cost of oil. He lifts his head from the cushion and looks around the room. A woman is sleeping with her veena across her body, her cheek pressed against the strings. Another lies on her side with her mouth open, a small sound coming from her throat. A third has rolled away from her drum, her hair fallen across her face. The flowers they wore in the evening are crushed under their hips and shoulders, bruised brown against the silk. A jeweled comb has come loose and lies on the floor. A wine cup has tipped over and stained a corner of the carpet. This is Yasa, a young man of considerable wealth. His father is the guildmaster of Benares, the head of one of the great merchant houses of the city. Yasa has 3 mansions, one for each of the 3 seasons, and a household staff of women musicians who play and sing for him every evening until he sleeps. No man enters the inner rooms. The arrangement is famous in the city. Other young men of his class envy him for it. Older men shake their heads at the indulgence and quietly wish their own fathers had been so generous. He has a chamberlain to manage the household, a cook to prepare the food, a clothier to dress him each morning, a perfumer who selects the scents he wears to the assemblies. Tonight he is seeing it for the first time. The same room he has slept in 1,000 nights. The same musicians who played for him last evening. The same disorder of sleeping bodies and crushed flowers and instruments dropped wherever they fell. Something has gone out of it for him. The thing that used to make all of this beautiful is no longer in the room. What he sees, in the lamplight before dawn, is something close to a charnel ground. The mouth that was singing is open in sleep. The hand that was holding the cup is twisted under a hip. The bodies that were beautiful are now only bodies. Without the music and the wine and the firelight, they are people he does not entirely recognize. The illusion that pleasure had built around them all evening has dissolved while they slept. They are themselves again. And so, for the first time in his life, is he. Two words rise in him that he cannot put down. It is distressing, he says, half to himself. It is oppressing. He says them again. They are the only two sentences he is capable of forming. He stands up. He does not wake the women. He puts on his golden sandals. He walks out of the room. He walks down the corridors of the mansion, past the bedchamber where his parents are still sleeping, past the courtyard where the small fire still burns at the gate. The watchmen do not stop him. Whether they are dozing, or whether they let the young master pass because that is not their business, is not recorded. He walks through the streets of Benares, past the houses where other young men of his class are sleeping in similar rooms. The streets at this hour belong to the sweepers and the water carriers and the men who light the small temple lamps before sunrise. A few of them notice the young master in the silk and the gold sandals walking past with his face set, and quickly look away. And out through the city gate. In the dark beyond the city he keeps walking. Two words follow him the whole way. It is distressing. It is oppressing. He has nothing else to say, and nothing else has any weight. The two words have become the shape of what he saw in the lamplight, and they will not let go of him. He walks until the road comes to a forest grove called the Deer Park, at a place called Isipatana. A man is sitting there in the open, waiting for the dawn. Yasa does not know who he is. Yasa is still saying the same two words to himself, half aloud, as he comes through the trees. The man hears him and answers him, as if continuing a conversation Yasa did not know they were having. Here, Yasa, there is no distress. Here there is no oppression. Sit down, and you will hear what is on the other side of those two words. Yasa stops. Someone has used his name without his telling them. Someone has answered the words he had not even spoken aloud, only thought again and again on the road from the city gate. He removes his golden sandals. He sets them down at the edge of the grove, placed neatly side by side, the way his mother had taught him to leave them when he was a small boy entering a teacher's room. He approaches the Buddha, bows, and sits down in front of him on the cool earth. The Buddha begins where every teaching begins for someone new. Generosity. Conduct. The peace that comes when the heart stops grasping at things. The kind of life, beyond this one, that opens for those who live in this way. Then the harder things. The trouble that hides inside pleasure, even pleasure that is harmless on the surface. The freedom that opens when the mind stops being organized around getting more of what it wants. Then the deepest things. Suffering. Its causes. Its ending. The path that walks out of it. Something opens in Yasa as the teaching unfolds. The dust that had been in his eye lifts. The Buddha calls this opening the Dharma eye, the seeing, for the first time, that whatever has the nature of arising has the nature of ceasing. What had been a confusion all night has become, in this morning, a quiet certainty. Yasa calls it relief. Meanwhile, back in the mansion in Benares, his mother has woken up. She had heard him come home in the night, the way she always did, the soft footfalls of his attendants, the music starting up. She had gone back to sleep then. Something had woken her again before dawn, some wrongness in the house she could not name. She finds the inner room empty. She finds the cushion where her son's head should be still warm. She finds his golden sandals missing. She wakes her husband. She tells him to take horsemen and find their boy before the city fully wakes and the news of his absence spreads. The father rides out at first light. He follows the road to Isipatana, which is the only road Yasa could have taken from the gate. He sees, at the edge of the grove, the golden sandals placed neatly side by side. He recognizes them at once. His heart breaks open in two directions, the relief of finding the sandals and the dread of what it means that they are placed so carefully and that his son is not in them. He walks into the grove. By a small kindness of conditions, the father comes to the Buddha first, before he sees his son. The Buddha receives him with the same warmth he received Yasa. He offers him a seat. He gives him the same teaching, in the same order, generosity and conduct and the deeper things. By the end of it, the father has become the first lay disciple in the world to take refuge in the Buddha, the teaching, and the community of practitioners. Where his son had been struck silent by what he saw in the lamplight, the father has been turned by what he heard in the morning light. Then he sees his son sitting nearby. "Yasa," he says, "your mother is grieving. She has been weeping since she found the room empty. Come home with me." Yasa, while he was listening to the teaching given to his father, has gone somewhere his father cannot reach for the moment. What had begun the night before has finished its work in him while he sat at the back of his father's lesson. The Dharma eye that had opened earlier has now opened all the way through. He cannot return to the inner room of the mansion as if nothing had happened in the lamplight. The Buddha turns to the father gently. "Householder," he says, Your son has gone past where you can call him home from. He is welcome to stay here, if you can spare him." The father is quiet for a long time. Then he asks the Buddha and Yasa to come to the house for the morning meal. It is the only thing he can think of to do. Something has happened that he does not yet have the framework to hold, but he can feed his son and his teacher, and his wife will see her boy alive, and that will be enough for this morning. The meal is taken. Yasa's mother and his former wife sit beside the Buddha and listen to the teaching. They, too, become lay disciples that morning. Then the Buddha and Yasa walk back to the deer park together. Yasa does not return to the mansion. Word travels in a city like Benares. Within a few days, 4 of Yasa's closest friends have heard. They are men of similar background, sons of the great merchant houses, men he had grown up beside. Their names are recorded: Vimala, Subal, Punnaji, Gavampati. They go to the deer park to find Yasa, partly out of love for him, partly out of curiosity about what could possibly have made him leave the life he had. What they hear, sitting beside him under the trees, turns them too. They had come to fetch him, or at least to argue with him, and instead they sit there listening until the same dust lifts from their own eyes. They go forth into the homeless life. Not long after, 50 more young men from the surrounding countryside, friends of the original 4, come and do the same. Within a few weeks, the deer park at Isipatana has become a small community of awakened ones. Yasa is the 7th person in the world, after the Buddha and the 5 who had been with him at the beginning, to walk all the way through to liberation. The 4 friends are the next. The 50 from the countryside follow. But the women who had played the lutes in the inner chamber, the other young men who envied Yasa his arrangement, the companions of the wine and the firelight, the men who had drunk with him at the festivals and the boating parties and the long summer evenings on the river, they never came. Some of the people who watched Yasa go did not understand what had happened. Some had no inclination to find out. Some, when the news reached them, shrugged and said the boy had always been a little odd and went back to their evenings. The ones who came were the ones whose own questions had already been waiting, quietly, in their bodies and their nights. This is a story about a young man who outgrew his life in a single night. It is also a story about who could and could not follow him into what came next. Some of the people closest to him, the ones he had eaten with and slept among and assumed would always be there, could not. Other people, a few of them, could. The line between them was not loyalty. The line was readiness. You may already know how this works in your own life. The friend who could meet you in your old questions cannot meet you in the new ones. The friend who never seemed close before turns out to be exactly the person who can sit with you now. A change in you is a sorting, even when no one means it that way. The people who can travel into the new place are sometimes the ones you would not have predicted. And the people you assumed would always come are sometimes the ones whose own readiness has not yet ripened. It is worth saying this clearly for the listener who has lived through it. The friend who cannot follow you into your new questions has not betrayed you. They are simply on a different stretch of the road from the one you have stepped onto. The grief is real. The losing is real. What feels like a failing of friendship is actually the natural consequence of two lives moving at different speeds. Two people who once moved at the same pace simply do not anymore. You may also be wondering, at this point, whether there is a way to tell, whether there is some kind of sign, some quiet diagnostic that lets you see in advance who will be able to come the distance with you and who will not. A long time ago, in another city, a young man, bowing to the air for reasons he himself did not fully understand, was given exactly that kind of map. The Buddha is walking through the outskirts of Rajagaha for alms, just after sunrise, when he sees a young man standing knee-deep in a wet field outside the city. The rain has been falling since before dawn. The road is muddy and the trees at the edge of the field are dripping. The young man is bowing to the east, then to the south, then to the west, then to the north. Then he kneels in the wet grass and bows to the earth. Then he stands and bows to the sky. His clothes are soaked through. His hair is plastered to his head. Whatever he is doing, he has been doing it for some time, and he has been doing it for some time without anyone explaining to him why. The boy's name is Sigala. He is the son of a man who has recently died. The death is still close enough that Sigala has not yet stopped expecting his father at certain times of day. His father was a quiet follower of the Buddha, a householder who kept the precepts and stopped by the bamboo grove when business took him near it. But the boy himself had not received any teaching. The father had not pushed it on him, perhaps thinking there would be more time. The bowing comes from his father's last instruction. Bow every morning to the 6 directions. The dying man had said, his hand on his son's wrist for the last time. It will protect you. The boy has not asked any questions. He has done as he was told. The Buddha approaches, not to interrupt, but to wait until the boy has finished. When Sigala notices him, wet hair in his eyes, he stops mid-bow and bows to the man on the road as well. The Buddha asks him, kindly, what he is doing out here in the rain. Sigala explains, a little embarrassed at how thin the explanation sounds when said aloud. His father, the instruction, the 6 directions. He cannot say more than that because he himself does not know more than that. The Buddha listens. He does not laugh at the boy. He does not correct him in front of his confusion. He simply tells him, in the gentlest possible way, that there is a different way to bow to the 6 directions, a way his father probably meant, but did not have the time to teach him before he died. Would the boy like to hear it? Sigala nods. He sits down in the wet grass at the edge of the field. The Buddha sits down with him. The 6 directions, in the way the noble ones bow to them, are people. The East is your parents, the ones who gave you your life. Bowing to the East in the morning is remembering them, remembering what was given to you before you knew you were receiving anything. The South is your teachers, the ones who gave you your understanding, who showed you how to read and count and think about a problem and live in a community. Bowing to the South is remembering them, whose patience you cost, whose work made it possible for you to know the things you now know. The West is your spouse and children, the ones whose lives are bound up with yours every day, the ones whose well-being you are responsible for, and who are quietly responsible for yours. The North is your friends and companions, the ones you walk through the world beside, the ones you eat with, the ones whose company keeps you from going strange in your own head. Below you are the workers and servants whose labor holds your life up, the ones who grow what you eat and make what you wear and clean what you live in. A bow toward the ground in the morning is a bow toward all the hidden hands that make your day possible. Above you are the contemplatives and the wise, the ones who carry the deeper teachings, the ones who have given their whole lives to working out what is true so that you can drink from a well you did not have to dig yourself. A bow toward the sky in the morning is a bow toward them. To bow to these 6 directions every morning, the Buddha says, is to bow to the actual structure of your life. Sigala listens. Something settles in him. The bowing he had been doing every morning suddenly has a shape. The East where his parents had stood. The South where his teachers had stood. The other directions filling in. His father had not asked him to bow to the rain and the air. His father had asked him to remember the people his life rested on. But the directions are only the beginning. Once Sigala has them, the Buddha gives him something more practical. A way to look at the people in the northern direction, where the friends are, and tell who is actually a friend and who is wearing the costume of one. There are 4 kinds of person, the Buddha says, who appear to be friends but are not. The first is the taker. This is the friend who shows up when there is something to be had and disappears when there is not. They take everything you offer and offer little or nothing in return. When they want something, they remember your friendship vividly. When you want something, they have other commitments. They are not cruel, usually. They simply have a friendship that runs in one direction, and they have arranged your relationship so that you are at the giving end and they are at the receiving end, and you have been letting it stay that way for years. The second is the talker. This is the friend who is generous with their words and stingy with their actions. They tell you what they would have done for you if they had only known you needed it. They tell you what they will do for you when the time is right. The time is never right. The action never comes. Their friendship is conducted in the past tense and the future tense. almost never in the present. When the moment comes for the talker to actually show up, they have a long story about why this particular thing is the one thing they cannot do this week. The third is the flatterer. This is the friend who agrees with everything you say. When you tell them about a wise decision, they cheer it on. When you tell them about a foolish decision, they cheer that on too. When you tell them about a decision they had warned you against the previous week, they have somehow forgotten the warning and now think the new direction is excellent. They are present in your face and absent behind your back. They are there to please you, not to challenge you, not to help you see. Their pleasantness is a constant low-grade comfort. You only realize much later that none of their warmth ever asked anything of you. The fourth is the bad companion. This is the friend who shows up when you are at your worst and helps you stay there. They are the one waiting outside the door of every behavior that hurts you. They make sure the door stays open. They have a rationalization ready. They have a story about how this time will be different, or how you deserve a little something after the day you have had. They need company in their own decline, and you are the company they have chosen. Sigala, by this point, is recognizing people. Faces are coming into his mind that he had not been able to put a name to before. A neighbor who only ever asked. A relative who only ever promised. A childhood friend who only ever agreed. A cousin who only ever called when there was wine and trouble. The four faces fit four people he had been trying to ignore something about for years. The Buddha goes on. The diagnostic only works if it includes both halves. So he gives Sigala the four true friends as well. The first is the helper. This is the friend who looks out for you when you are not paying attention. They notice when something is off in your life. They protect what is precious to you when you are not there to protect it yourself. They give more than you asked for. When you are afraid, their presence makes the fear smaller. They are the friend who shows up the day after the funeral with food in their hands and no need to be thanked. The second is the friend who is the same in joy and sorrow. This is the friend whose face does not change when your life changes. They are with you in the good seasons and the bad ones. They keep your secrets. They share theirs with you. If you fall into trouble, they do not look for the door. The Buddha says of this friend that they would lay down what is theirs to keep you whole, if it came to it. The third is the friend who tells you what is true. This is the friend who restrains you from doing what would harm you. They urge you toward what would heal you. They tell you the things you do not already know, even when those things are uncomfortable to hear. They show you a path you could not have seen on your own. Their aim is your becoming whole, even when that requires the harder words. This is the friend who watches you make the same mistake for the third time and tells you, kindly, that you are doing it again. The fourth is the sympathetic friend. This is the friend whose face brightens when good things happen to you. Your difficulties grieve them too. They speak well of you to others when you are not in the room. They quiet the people who are speaking against you, just by their steady reluctance to join in. Their warmth toward you is steady, not occasional, not conditional on what you have just done for them. Sigala recognizes these too, though there are fewer of them in his life. An aunt who has been quietly looking out for him since his father died. A friend from his school days who has stayed close even though they no longer live in the same neighborhood. An old man at the edge of the market who told him the truth once, when no one else would, and never asked anything in return. They are few, but they are enough. This was the Buddha's gift to Sigala that morning, in the rain. 2 short lists. One that named the costumes, and one that named the actual presences underneath them. A way of looking at the people in his life that did not require him to test them or wait for catastrophe to find out who they were. A way of seeing now, in the daily texture of how they treat him. You may also be doing the recognizing, right now, as the lists are heard. The taker who you keep saying yes to. The talker whose promises you keep waiting on. The flatterer whose praise you keep wanting even though you do not entirely believe it. The bad companion you keep meeting in the place you swore last time you would not go back to. And on the other side, the few quieter ones who keep showing up, who keep telling you the truth, who keep being there when you are afraid. A note on how to use this map. The Buddha gave Sigala the diagnostic so that he could see clearly. What Sigala did with what he saw was his to decide. You may decide that some of the takers are family and you have made your peace with what they are, and you will continue to give what you can give without expecting return. You may decide that some of the talkers are warm in other ways, and you do not need their actions to value them. But you may also stop waiting for the talkers to act. You may stop being surprised when the takers take. You may stop confusing the flatterers with the friends who would tell you the hard thing. You may give the bad companion less of your evenings and begin to spend more time with the few quieter ones whose presence you may have been undervaluing for years. The map helps with everyone outside you, but there is one person whose face does not appear on either list and whose treatment of you is the most important treatment you receive in any given day. That person is asleep beside you tonight, or is alone in your house tonight, or is the one you have never quite thought to put on the list. A king and his queen, a long time ago, stood on a high terrace and stumbled into the answer to a question they had not meant to ask each other. Malika, he says, is there anyone you love more than yourself? The two of them are standing on the upper terrace of the palace at first light. The terrace is one of the few places in Savatthi where the king is permitted to ask such a question and receive an honest answer. Below them, the city is just beginning to stir. Smoke is rising from the kitchens. The first water carriers are out at the wells. A bullock cart is moving slowly along one of the wider streets. Up here, the wind is slightly cooler than it will be in an hour. A few birds are calling from the gardens behind the palace. The eastern sky is still pale, the colour just barely beginning to come back into things. the world has not yet started its demands on either of them. His name is Pasenadi. He is king of Kosala, a country large enough to have several borders to worry about and several rival kings to keep peace with. He has armies to manage, ministers to placate, a treasury to keep balanced, a large household and a larger family to keep tended. He is surrounded all day by people whose answers to his questions have been carefully calibrated to keep him pleased. The court is a place where direct speech is dangerous and softened speech is everywhere. Malika is the one in the palace who answers him as if he were a man and not a king. She came from a flower seller's stall outside the city by an unusual route. One morning, when she was still a girl weaving garlands at the gate of the gardens where her father worked, a man came past on alms round. She offered him what little food she had with her, a portion she had been saving for her own midday meal. He ate it. Then he made her a quiet prediction about her future, the kind of prediction that ought not to come true and yet did. Later that same day, a young king came riding past the garden, exhausted from a battle he had nearly lost. He saw her there. By evening, she was being carried into the palace as his queen. She has not forgotten the stall. She has not forgotten what it cost her father to send her out at sunrise to weave flowers for other people's celebrations. She is honest in the way of people who remember what they came from. The question hangs between them on the terrace. Is there anyone you love more than yourself? She looks at him. The question is unusual. The king does not usually ask her things he does not already know the answer to. But this one is different. He has been quiet for several days. Some thought has been working in him, and now, at first light, with the city still half asleep, he has finally let the question come out of him into the open air. She takes the question seriously. She thinks about it. She could give him the answer he is hoping for. She could say his name or the names of their children and watch his face soften. The court would expect this. The story she would later tell her women about this morning conversation would be much more comfortable to tell. But the king has asked her, on the upper terrace at first light, when there is no one to perform for and no benefit to be gained by lying. She does not give the comfortable answer. There is no one, great king, that I love more than myself, she says. She lets the answer sit between them. She does not soften it. She does not explain it. She watches his face while waiting for him to take it in. The king does not move. He absorbs the answer the way a man absorbs the news of something he had half suspected for years. Then she does the more interesting thing. She turns the question back to him. "And what about you?" she asks. "Is there anyone you love more than yourself?" The king turns the question over in himself. He is a man who loves his wife. He has children he loves. He has a teacher he reveres above almost any other man alive. He has a country he is responsible for, and an army he is responsible for, and friends from his youth he still keeps close. Surely, he thinks, the answer is one of these. He searches for it carefully, looking through the faces in his mind one by one. Malika, his son, the Buddha, the friends from his boyhood. Each face he holds up against the question and against the love he is asking himself if he has for them. What he finds, when he looks honestly, is the same answer his wife gave him. There is no one, Malika, he says, not even you, not even my children. What I love most in this world is myself. They stand together at the railing for some time. Neither of them says anything. The light goes on, changing on the city below. A small wind moves through the railings. The honesty of what they have just said to each other is a strange weight. Most people would consider it a shameful answer. The two of them have arrived at it together, in the only place they could, at the only hour they could, and it does not feel shameful. It feels like something has been put down between them that they had been quietly carrying separately for years. After a while, the king speaks. "Let us go down to the Blessed One," he says. "He will know what to make of this." They walk down through the palace, through the morning bustle of attendants and courtiers, out through the gate to the grove where the Buddha is staying. The king takes her hand for some of the walk. They speak very little. Both of them are still inside the recognition they had on the terrace. The attendants who walk behind them at a respectful distance can see that something has happened. They cannot see what. The morning streets of Savatthi part for the king and his queen, as they always do. Today, neither of them notices. The Buddha is sitting at the foot of a tree when they arrive. He sees their faces as they come up the path between the trees. Whatever has happened, he can see it has happened to both of them at once. He has known the king for a long time. He has rarely seen him this quiet. He invites them to sit. The king tells him the conversation. Without softening, as Malika had not softened. Without apologizing for what they had found in themselves. We asked each other this morning, Blessed One, and we both arrived at the same answer. Each of us loves himself more than anyone else. We are told, in the wisdom we have been raised on, that this is a shameful answer to give. Tell us what to make of this. The Buddha listens. He waits long enough that the king and queen begin to think he may have nothing to say. Then he speaks, with the calm of a man putting their own discovery into words larger than they had been able to find for it. Searching all directions with the mind, he says, one finds nowhere anyone dearer than oneself. So too, every other being holds the self most dear. Therefore, one who loves himself should not harm another. The verse settles in the grove. The king and queen do not speak. The Buddha does not elaborate. He has put their private discovery into a sentence that they will both carry with them for the rest of their lives. What had felt, on the terrace, like a quiet shame is now the doorway to something larger. The teaching has done what it needed to do. What had been a private discovery on the terrace, something they had been half ashamed of even as they confessed it to each other, the Buddha has just turned into the foundation of an ethical life. Everyone holds themselves most dear. This is the universal condition of beings. And from this universal condition, a single principle follows. If you hold yourself most dear, and so does every other being, then the one principle that respects this fact is do not harm others. The principle holds because each of them is the king of their own terrace. Each of them is the queen of their own dawn. Each of them holds themselves dear with the same fierce, instinctive love that you hold yourself dear. To harm another being is to act as if this were not true. And the Buddha has just told you that it is true for every single being you will ever meet. For most of us, this is a difficult truth to receive about ourselves. We have been told from childhood that we are supposed to love others more than ourselves. Many of the wisdom traditions in this part of the world tend to praise self-sacrifice, to call it virtue, to make us suspicious of any honest preference for our own life over other lives. The Buddha was not impressed by that suspicion. He spent his life around householders and contemplatives, and he watched what happened when people tried to pretend they did not love themselves more than they loved everyone else. The pretense created its own kind of trouble. The pretender ended up resentful. The pretender ended up exhausted. The pretender ended up secretly wanting credit for their giving, while loudly insisting they wanted no credit. The pretender ended up unable to receive because receiving meant admitting they had needs. Their relationships became one-way roads, and the people on the other end did not know how to give back to them because they had never learned how to ask. Honesty about loving yourself is not selfishness. It is the ground from which actual care for others can rise. The person who admits they hold themselves most dear can take care of themselves without guilt, can rest when they need to rest, can say no when no is the truthful answer, can give from a place of genuine fullness. And from that fullness, they can recognize that the person across from them is doing exactly the same thing from inside their own life. They are also the king of their own terrace. They are also the queen of their own dawn. Knowing this changes the way you stand in your relationships. When someone treats you in a way you would never treat them, you can hold both truths at once. They are doing what they are doing because they are at the center of their own life. You are at the center of yours. A great deal of what they did was about them in ways you assumed was about you. The friend who forgot your birthday was not punishing you. They were inside their own week, their own deadlines, their own slow exhaustion. The relative who said the cutting thing at the family meal was not reaching for you in particular. They were inside their own old wound, still bleeding under the table. The colleague who took credit for your work was not betraying you personally. They were inside their own ambition, doing the only thing their fear would let them do. When you yourself fall short of what you wanted to give someone, you can hold that gently as well. You were also at the center of your own life, doing what you could from inside it. there is a release in this. A release from the long story of being a worse person than you should be. A release from the old idea that you are supposed to make yourself smaller in order to make others bigger. A release from the constant low-grade guilt of preferring your own life to the lives of strangers. A release that lets you stand up straight in a room full of people without having to apologize for taking up space in it. The teaching given to Pasanadi and Malika that morning was a permission slip handed to two people who had been living in the center of their own lives all along, to admit it and to use the admission as the foundation of how they treated everyone they met. What changes when you receive this teaching is the quality of your kindness. Kindness given out of obligation is exhausting and quietly resentful. Kindness given because you can see that the other person holds themselves dear in the same way you hold yourself dear is different. It is steady. It does not require gratitude. It does not require the other person to perform anything in return. It is rooted in a truth about beings that you will never be able to forget once you have seen it. It is the kindness of someone who has stopped trying to be a saint and has settled into being a person. The teaching works inside your own house. It works between you and the person you wake up next to. It works between you and your children. It works between you and yourself. But it has another use for situations none of us choose. Sometimes a person walks into your morning carrying a hatred that has nothing to do with you and chooses to put it down at your feet. The dignity of holding yourself dear becomes, in that moment, the only thing protecting you from taking on what was never yours. A long time ago, in a famous garden where the Buddha sometimes taught, someone walked toward him with exactly that kind of hatred ready in his hands. For 3 days, the Brahmin has been preparing his curses. He has barely eaten in 3 days. He has barely slept. He has been pacing his courtyard, rehearsing aloud the words he intends to say to the man he holds responsible for the loss of his brother. The household has learned to stay out of his path. His wife brings him food in the evening, sets it down beside him, and goes back inside without speaking. The food usually goes cold. The servants whisper to each other in the kitchens. They have never seen the master like this. His name is Bharadvaja. He comes from one of the older Brahmin families of Magadha, a family with deep roots in the rituals of the kingdom and with land and standing built up over many generations. A few weeks ago, his older brother walked out of the family home and went forth as a follower of the wandering teacher who has been staying in the bamboo grove on the edge of the city. The older brother had simply put on a yellow robe and gone, without asking permission, without waiting for the family council, without even leaving a proper letter behind. The first they knew of it was an empty room and a folded set of his old white clothes on the bed. Bharadvaja has not been able to think of anything else since. In a Brahmin family of his standing, the older brother is the heir. The older brother carries the family rituals forward. The older brother is responsible for maintaining the line and the household and the relationships with the neighboring families and the proper performance of the inherited fire rites. Bharadvaja has now, overnight, become the heir. The weight of all of this has fallen on him without warning. He had spent his whole life arranging himself in the second position, the easier position, the one with fewer obligations. Becoming the eldest son was the last thing he had wanted. Now he is the eldest son of a man who has lost an heir. His mother weeps in the evenings. His father will not speak to him. The whole household has rearranged itself around the absence of the brother who left. In Bharadvaja's mind, none of this is his brother's fault. His brother was always a quiet, dutiful man, the kind who would never have left the family on his own. Someone must have taken him. Someone must have whispered into his ear about freedom and unbinding, and the deeper meanings of the rituals, until his brother could no longer see clearly. That someone is the wandering teacher in the bamboo grove, the man who calls himself the awakened one. So this morning, with his curses gathered in him like a cloud about to break, Bharadvaja walks across the city of Rajagaha toward the bamboo grove. The route takes him past the stalls of the marketplace just opening, past the wells where women are drawing the day's water, past the small shrines of household gods at the corners of the streets, past the cart of a fishmonger arguing with a customer about the price of the morning catch, past a small boy crying because he has dropped his bowl of milk. He notices none of it. His face is set. The people who see him pass remember, later, that he was muttering to himself, and that the muttering had a shape and a rhythm that was not entirely sane. A few of them step aside as he passes, not from respect, but because there is something in his face that says he should not be interrupted. The bamboo grove is quiet at this hour. Light comes down through the bamboo in long, thin lines, patterning the ground. A few birds are calling somewhere in the upper canopy. The grove was given to the Buddha years ago by King Bimbisara, a place where seekers could come at any hour and find him available. The Buddha is sitting under one of the trees, a small group of disciples around him, the morning teaching just beginning. Bharadvaja walks straight up to him, ignoring the disciples, ignoring the etiquette that any visitor would normally observe. He stops in front of the Buddha, and he begins. The curses he has prepared come out of him in a long stream. The full vocabulary of Brahmin contempt applied to a man he believes has stolen his brother and ruined his family. The names for low caste people, the names for thieves and cheats, the names for those who have abandoned their family duties, the names for those who lead others astray, the names for those who pretend to be holy in order to swallow up other men's households. Each curse comes with a sharpness Bharadvaja has been working on for 3 days, a precision in the cruelty, a careful selection of words designed to land where he believes they will hurt the most. The Buddha listens. He neither interrupts nor flinches. He gives no signal to the disciples to remove the Brahmin from his presence, though they are clearly waiting for one. He simply lets Bharadvaja finish. A man who has prepared his curses for 3 days has a great deal to say, and the Buddha gives him the time to say all of it. The disciples will speak about this morning for years afterward. What they remember is not the curses. What they remember is the unmoved face of their teacher, the way his attention did not waver, the way his presence remained the same shape it had been before the Brahmin arrived. Eventually, Bharadvaja runs out of words. He stands there, breathing hard, the air around him still ringing with the things he has said. He had expected the Buddha to be defending himself by now. He had expected to be asked to leave. He had expected anger, at the very least. The whole purpose of his preparation had been to provoke a reaction big enough to feed the story he had been telling himself for weeks. What he has met instead is a quiet attention, so steady that his words seem, in retrospect, to have fallen on something that did not catch them. His own anger, in the silence that follows, begins to feel oddly out of place, like a fire that has been lit in a room with no air. The Buddha looks at him. "Brahmin," he says, his voice almost conversational, "may I ask you something?" The gentleness of the address is itself a small shock. The Buddha has not used Bharadvaja's name. He has not raised his voice. He has spoken to him as one householder might speak to another at a market stall. Bharadvaja, too breathless to refuse, nods. "Do guests come to your house from time to time?" the Buddha asks. "Of course," Bharadvaja says. "What kind of household would I have if guests did not come?" "And when they come, do you offer them food?" "Of course," Bharadvaja says again. "A guest who is not fed is an insult to the household. And if you offer them food, and they do not accept it, to whom does that food then belong?" Bharadvaja stops. The question is not at all what he expected. He turns it over for a moment. "The food belongs to me," he says. "If I offered it, and they refused it, it remains mine." "So too, Brahmin," the Buddha says. "The abuse you have offered me this morning, I do not accept. It remains yours." The bamboo grove goes very quiet. Bharadvaja stands there, his anger still hot in his body, his curses still ringing in his ears, and slowly, as the Buddha's sentence settles in him, he understands that the man in front of him has not received any of it. The thing he came to deliver is still in his own hands. He is still holding it, burning at the end of his arms. Then the Buddha gives him the second teaching of the morning. A man who returns abuse with abuse, the Buddha says, only adds to the heat of what was already burning. A man who does not return it is more victorious in this moment than any king who has ever conquered a city in battle. Because the king can lose what he has won. The man who refuses to take in another's hatred has won something nobody can take from him. The victory belongs entirely to him, regardless of what the other person does next, regardless of whether they ever apologize, regardless of whether they ever even understand what just happened. Bharadvaja does not know what to do with what has just happened to him. The energy he came in with has nowhere to go. The Buddha has given him no enemy to push against. The disciples are still sitting quietly, watching him without judgment. The story he had been telling himself for weeks, the story in which his brother had been stolen by a man who needed to be confronted, has just had its central figure removed from the center of the story. Without the Buddha to be angry at, the anger has nowhere to live. Without the anger, the grief beneath it begins to come up. He sits down on the ground, too suddenly for grace, and puts his head in his hands. The Buddha lets him sit. After a while, Bharadvaja asks, in a voice he barely recognizes as his own, if he might also go forth. If he might join his brother in the yellow robe. If he might be taught what his brother has been taught. The Buddha nods. The Brahmin who came to humiliate the teacher leaves the grove that morning as a bhikkhu, as an ordained student. His brother, when he hears, weeps, partly from joy and partly from the strangeness of the household his parents will now have to absorb. Their mother, when she hears, sits silent for a long time. She will lose another son to the yellow robe before the year is out. Their father will take longer to make sense of it, but eventually he will, too, and the family will rearrange itself once more, this time around 2 absences instead of 1. The teaching the Buddha gave Bharadvaja that morning has been quoted ever since. A gift not received belongs to the giver. Anger that meets nothing returns to the one who threw it. The most important word in the whole story is the word accept. The Buddha listened to every word Bharadvaja said. He simply did not accept what was being offered. You may want to feel for a moment what that distinction is in your own body. Listening is one thing. Accepting is another. When someone speaks to you in a way that is meant to wound, something in you reaches out to take what they are offering. The reach is automatic. It happens before you have thought about it. By the time you notice it, you are already holding the wound in your hands and trying to figure out what to do with it. You begin to plan a response. You begin to feel hurt. You begin to want them to know how much they have hurt you. You begin to gather the evidence of why their words were unfair, the long list of times they have done this kind of thing before. All of this happens because the small grasping hand inside you reached out to take their gift, and now you are stuck with it. The practice the Buddha demonstrated in the bamboo grove that morning is not to stop listening. It is to slow down the reach. To let the words land in your awareness without sending the small grasping hand out to receive them. To recognize, in the moment, that this hatred is the gift the other person is offering, and that you have a choice about whether to take it. Most of the time, we take it without noticing. The reach happens before the thought. The wound lodges before the awareness arrives. The The story of Bharadvaja is the story of one man being shown by the simple example of a Buddha who did not take it, that there was a choice all along. A space had been there the whole time, between the words landing in the air and the words landing in him, and he had never noticed it because no one had ever modeled the use of that space for him. There may be a person in your life who comes at you with this kind of energy. Maybe it is occasional, maybe it is constant. Maybe you have known them for 30 years and you have been receiving their gift without question that whole time. Maybe they are someone you love, who in their own pain is unable to keep their pain contained, and you have been the closest available place for them to put it down. The teaching asks for one thing only, that the small grasping hand inside you stop reaching out automatically to take what they are offering. The changes it requires are inside you. Whether you stay in the room or eventually leave is a separate question. There is a quiet pride in the practice that grows over time. The pride of a person who has stopped being moved by the small daily winds that move other people around. Something more like an internal sovereignty. A stillness that is alive, available to respond, simply not knocked off center by what is being thrown. A man on the road can curse you, and you can hear it without taking it home with you. A relative at the family meal can say the unkind thing, and you can chew your food and answer or not answer, and the meal continues. When the hand stops reaching, the words begin to fall on a different surface. They are still words. You still hear them. You can even respond to them in a measured way if a response is needed. But they do not lodge. The next morning you do not wake up rehearsing them. They stay with the person who said them, the way uneaten food stays in the host's kitchen. And something in your nervous system, after enough practice, begins to recognize this as your normal state rather than as an achievement. You stop bracing for the next gift. You begin to walk through your day with your hands open and unclenched, ready to do other things with them than catch what is being thrown at you. The teaching is for the times when you can stay in the room with the person and refuse the gift they are offering. But there are other times when staying in the room is itself the wrong move. When the people involved cannot be reached at all, when the conditions are not yet ripe for any teaching to land, the wisest action is to step back from the situation and let it ripen on its own time. Even the Buddha, on at least one occasion in his life, walked away from a quarrel he could not fix. The story of where he went and who he found there waiting for him is one of the most quietly tender moments in the entire canon. It begins, as these things usually do, with something almost too small to be worth fighting about. The monastery at Kosambi was a large one, built and maintained by a wealthy supporter named Gozita. Many monks lived there. The community was respected throughout the region. A monk in the great monastery at Kosambi left a small amount of water in the basin he had used to wash himself. Another monk, a specialist in the discipline, I noticed it and pointed out that this was a minor breach of monastic protocol. first monk acknowledged the breach. The second monk explained how to make the formal acknowledgement properly. The first monk, who was a senior teacher of the doctrine in his own right, performed the acknowledgement. Everything should have ended there. But the next day, the second monk was overheard saying that the first monk had not really understood what he had been confessing, that his acknowledgement had been incomplete. Word reached the first monk. The first monk's students felt that the second monk had insulted their teacher. The second monk's students felt that the first monk's students were defending an incomplete confession. Within a week, the monastery had 2 camps. Within 2 weeks, the camps were not eating together. Within a month, they were not even reciting the Patimokkha, the fortnightly recitation of the rules, in the same hall. These things grow. What had started with a small amount of water in a basin had become, within a few weeks, the most serious schism the Buddha's community had faced in his lifetime. Lay supporters were taking sides. Senior monks were sending letters. The whole future of the Sangha in Kosambi was at risk. The Buddha was staying at Gozita's monastery on the edge of the city. News of the dispute reached him. He went to the assembly of the quarreling monks. He sat down among them. He spoke to them about the harm of quarreling. He reminded them of the teachings on harmony. He pointed out, very gently, that the original disagreement had been about something so small it was barely an offense at all. He asked them to put it down. The monks listened politely, as monks listen politely to a teacher, and then a leading voice from one of the camps spoke up. "Lord," the monk said, "please do not trouble yourself with this matter. Stay at ease. We will handle it among ourselves." The Buddha went away. He came back a few days later. He spoke to them again, this time more directly. He told them the famous old story of King Digiti, whose son Dihavu refused to take revenge on the king who had executed his father because he remembered his father's last instruction. Hatred is never appeased by hatred, only by non-hatred. He let the story sit in the room. He waited. A leading voice from one of the camps, perhaps the same one, spoke up again. "Lord, please do not trouble yourself. Stay at ease. The matter is between us. We will handle it." The Buddha went away again. He came back a third time. This time he did not sit down among them. He stood at the edge of the assembly. He spoke a verse, very quietly, the kind of verse that monks learn in the first year of their training. "Others do not understand that we are all perishing here," the verse says. "Those who do understand it, their quarrels cease." He waited again to see whether the verse landed in any of the faces in the assembly. It did not. The faces of the leading monks of both camps were closed. The students of those leaders were looking at their leaders rather than at him. He saw, in that quiet moment, that the conditions for any teaching to take were not yet present in the room. The Buddha then spoke a different kind of verse. "If, while wandering, You find no companion equal or better. Hold to a solitary course. There is no fellowship with fools. He turned and walked out of the assembly. The monks watched him go. They assumed he would return the next morning, as he had returned the previous times. He did not. Before dawn the next day, the Buddha put on his robe, took up his bowl, and walked out of Gusita's monastery alone. He told no one where he was going. He took no attendant with him. He simply left. The first the monks knew of his departure was when the morning came and he did not appear for the meal. He walked north, away from the cities, into the forest country at a place called Parilayaka. He found a quiet grove, a beautiful sal tree to sit beneath, and he stayed there. No human company. No teaching schedule. No assemblies. No quarreling voices in the next building. Only the trees and his own breath and the patience of someone who has done what he could and is now waiting for conditions to change on their own time. He was not entirely alone. A bull elephant lived in that forest, a leader of his herd, who had grown weary of the noise and the constant demands of the younger elephants and had separated himself for a time of solitude of his own. The elephant noticed the Buddha. The elephant began, in his own way, to look after him. In the morning, the elephant brought the Buddha water in his trunk for washing. He swept the area around the Buddha's seat with a branch held in his trunk, clearing leaves and small debris. He brought him fruit from the trees the Buddha could not reach himself. He stood guard at the edge of the small clearing through the night, warning off any other animals who might have disturbed the Buddha's rest. The two of them lived this way for the entire rain's retreat that year. The Buddha and the elephant, two solitary beings, each having walked away from a community that had become too noisy to bear. The early Buddhist record preserves the moment with unusual care, as if the people who passed the story down recognized that something rare had happened in that grove. Not a teaching delivered to 1,000 listeners. A teacher accompanied by a single elephant, being looked after, being given the rest he needed. Meanwhile, back in Kosambi, the news of the Buddha's departure spread. The lay supporters of the monastery, the families who had been bringing the daily food for years, heard why the Buddha had left. Their reaction was clear and quick. If the Buddha could not stay because of the quarreling, they would not feed the quarreling monks. When the next morning's alms round came, the bowls came back empty. The lay people closed their doors. They greeted the monks coldly. They did not bow when the monks passed in the street. For the first few days, the monks of both camps maintained their positions. They told themselves that the lay people would come around. By the end of the first week, hunger had begun to do its work. The monks, who had been so certain about the original infraction, began to wonder whether the position they were defending had really been worth the loss of their teacher, the loss of their food, the loss of their standing in the community. The monks who had been so certain about the formal procedures of confession began to wonder the same thing. It took some weeks, but eventually Through the slow pressure of hunger and disgrace, both camps came to the same recognition. They had let a small thing become a large thing. They had refused the Buddha's intervention 3 times. They had driven their teacher out of the city by their own stubbornness. They had become the kind of monks the lay people no longer wanted to feed. The shame of this began to outweigh whatever satisfaction had remained in the original quarrel. One by one, the leaders of both camps began to send small, tentative messages to each other through the younger monks who had not been so deeply invested. The hostility began to soften. The need to be right began to thin out. When the rains ended, the monks of both camps gathered themselves together, all of them, and they walked. The walk took several weeks. They walked through villages where the lay people watched them pass without offering them anything. They walked through forests where they had to forage for what they could find. They walked across the country to Savatthi, where the Buddha had gone after the Parilayaka forest. They walked without their usual dignity. They walked carrying their bowls, their lay supporters' silence still heavy on them, their own quarrel finally quiet inside them. When they reached Savatthi, they bowed at the Buddha's feet and asked his forgiveness. The Buddha received them. He did not lecture them about the cost of their quarrel. He did not extract any promises. He simply received them back into the community. Sariputta, who had been with the Buddha through the rains, received them with the same warmth. The other senior disciples followed his example. What had needed to happen had happened on its own time, through the slow ripening of their own conditions. No teaching he could have given them in the heat of the dispute would have done what hunger and shame and a long walk did over the course of a season. This is one of the most striking stories in the early Buddhist record. Not because the conflict was so dramatic. The conflict was almost embarrassingly small. What is striking is the Buddha's response to the conflict. He tried 3 times to intervene. When his interventions could not land, he stopped trying. He did not threaten. He did not punish. He did not appeal to higher authority. He simply withdrew and let the situation work itself out. For most of us, this is one of the harder teachings to absorb. When someone we love is caught in a conflict that we believe we can help with, the impulse to intervene is enormous. We try to mediate. We try to explain. We try to translate one party to the other. We send messages back and forth. When our efforts fail, the impulse is to try harder, to try a different angle, to enlist allies, to stay in the middle of the situation, hoping that this time we will find the words that turn it around. The Buddha tried 3 times. Then he stopped. He stopped because he could see that the conditions for the teaching to land were not present. The monks were too gripped by their own positions to hear anything from outside. What they needed was not more words from him. They needed time, hunger, and the experience of consequences they had created themselves. Only those things would soften them enough for any teaching to reach them. Walking away, in this story, is not abandonment. It is care of a higher order than continued intervention would have been. The Buddha knew that staying and pushing would have made him part of the conflict, a third position for the monks to organize themselves against, rather than a quiet space outside it that might eventually pull them back to themselves. By leaving, he gave them the gift of his absence. The absence was the teaching. They had to taste, in his absence, what their quarrel had cost them. No one could have explained that to them in advance with any words. You may have a person in your life right now who is caught in a conflict you cannot fix for them. Maybe it is a sibling and a parent. Maybe it is a friend and their partner. Maybe it is two parts of your own family that have stopped speaking and refuse to acknowledge each other at gatherings. You have probably already tried to mediate. You have probably already tried to translate. You have probably noticed that nothing you say lands. The teaching from the Yasa forest is that this is information. Information that the conditions are not yet ripe for any intervention you could offer. The most loving thing you can do, at that point, may be to step back and let time do the slow work that words cannot do. Hunger, in their case, will look like the natural consequences of how they are choosing to live. Disgrace, in their case, will look like the slow withdrawal of the people whose support they had taken for granted. When the conditions ripen, they will know. They may even come and ask you for help on their own time in a way they could not before. There is a small detail in the story that bears noticing. When the Buddha withdrew into the forest, he did not punish himself for having failed to fix the situation. He sat under a sal tree. He let an elephant bring him water. He rested. The withdrawal returned him to the conditions in which his own peace could be sustained while the slower work happened elsewhere, outside his control. The Buddha understood, better than most, that you cannot help anyone from a place where you yourself are depleted and frantic. There is a difference, however, between situations where withdrawal is the wise move and situations where the wound has already gone in deep enough that no withdrawal will undo it. Sometimes the harm is already inside you, still working in the body, and the question is not whether to stay in the room with the person who caused it. The question is what to do with what they have already left in you. The Buddha had a famous teaching about exactly this. He used the image of two arrows and a moment in the canon where his monks were asked the most extreme version of this question imaginable. Imagine, the Buddha said one afternoon to his monks, that an untrained person is shot in the body by an arrow. The pain is real. It hurts. The body cries out. Now imagine that immediately afterwards, while the first arrow is still in the flesh, a second arrow is shot into the same place. The pain doubles. The body shudders. The original wound is now compounded by a fresh wound on top of it. That is what an untrained mind does to itself, the Buddha said, when something painful happens. The first arrow is the pain itself. The injury, the loss, the cruel word, the body that has fallen sick. The second arrow is everything the mind adds to it. The replay, the grief beyond the moment, the hatred toward whoever caused it, the story of who is to blame, the fear that this kind of pain will keep coming, the shame of having been hurt at all. The first arrow is delivered by the world. The second arrow we deliver to ourselves. The trained person, the Buddha said, still feels the first arrow. The pain of the world is the pain of the world. No practice removes that. What the practice removes is the second arrow. The trained person is hurt and stays with the hurt. They do not double the suffering by adding their own contribution. They feel the pain. They watch it move through them. They let it pass through without lodging in the additional layers of resentment and replay that turn a single pain into a long-running wound. The first arrow is unavoidable. The second arrow is optional. Most of the suffering of a human life is the second arrow, fired by the same hand that has been wounded. This is one of the simplest teachings in the early Buddhist record. It is also one of the hardest to put into practice. The first arrow has already happened by the time you notice anything. The practice cannot reach back through time and prevent it. The second arrow is the one we have a choice about. And we shoot it, almost always, before we have realized we have a choice. Sit for a moment with the wounds you are carrying tonight. The harsh thing someone said to you this week. The relationship that ended in a way you did not understand. The decision someone close to you made that has rearranged your life. The illness in the body that you did not ask for and that will not yet leave. The first arrow, in each case, is the thing itself. The second arrow is what your mind has been doing with the thing for the last several days, or several months, or several years. Notice, as you sit with it, how much of the suffering is the second arrow. The original injury was a moment. The replay has been going on much longer. The story about whose fault it is has been going on much longer. The list of grievances that grew out of it has been going on much longer. The first arrow lasted a few seconds. The second arrow has been firing over and over ever since. This is the Buddha's first teaching on the matter, from a discourse called the Salatha Sutta, the discourse on the dart. The simpler one, the one that anyone who has lived for a few decades can recognize as true. The teaching has been preserved with great care because it is the foundation of every later Buddhist teaching on suffering. Pain is one thing. What we add to it is another. The path of practice works on the second, not the first. He had a second teaching on the same subject for those who were ready for it, and the second teaching is harder to receive. It comes from a discourse called the Simile of the Saw, the Kakakupama Sutta. The Buddha was teaching his monks about the practice of patience under provocation. The discourse arose because of a particular monk in the assembly who was being difficult, who was rumored to take correction badly, who had been quarreling with other monks over small matters. The Buddha was speaking, in part, for that monk's benefit. He had given them several examples, each one stronger than the last, of how the heart should be trained to remain steady in the face of unkind speech and unkind action. Then he came to the strongest example he could find. "Monks," he said, "even if bandits should seize you and saw your limbs from your body with a two-handled saw, if you let your mind become hostile toward them, you would not be following my teaching." The image is shocking. The Buddha intends it to be shocking. He is not asking his monks to imagine a small annoyance. He is asking them to imagine the most extreme physical violation a human being can experience, happening slowly while they watch. And he is telling them that even there, even in that situation, the practice of non-hatred is the practice he is offering them. The first time most people hear this teaching, they do one of two things. They reject it as impossible, or they suspect it of being a kind of spiritual cruelty, as though the Buddha were asking his students to perform an inhuman saintliness in the face of horrific harm. Both responses miss what he was actually doing. The Buddha was setting the upper boundary of what the practice eventually reaches. He chose the most extreme image he could find precisely so that the smaller daily cases would seem manageable in comparison. He was saying, in effect, the heart can, with enough training, remain free of hatred even at the most extreme limit imaginable. Therefore, the smaller cases, the daily insults and disappointments and cruelties that you actually face, are well within the reach of this practice. The simile of the saw is a measure of the heart's reach. It is the Buddha showing his monks the size of the territory the heart is capable of holding, so that they will stop assuming their daily provocations are too large to bring under the practice. If the heart can, in principle, remain free of hatred even at the limit of physical violation, then the heart can certainly remain free of hatred at the level of the criticism your colleague made about your work, the comment your in-law made at dinner, the letter that did not arrive, the apology that was never offered. The reach of the practice is much larger than the reach of any of the small daily things that hurt us. Apply the measure to your own life. The thing that hurt you this week, the cruel word, the broken promise, the relationship that turned cold, place it in the same room as the bandits with the saw. See the relative size. The bandits with the saw are an extreme that you will almost certainly never face. The cruel word is something the Buddha would say is well within the heart's training to meet without hatred. The measure does not minimize your hurt. Your hurt is real. Your wound is real. What the measure does is place the wound in a perspective that the heart can begin to work with, rather than leaving it to grow into something that feels too large to be addressed at all. Now combine the two teachings. The first teaching tells you that the second arrow is the one you have a choice about. The second teaching tells you that the choice is available even at the most extreme limit imaginable. So, the choice is certainly available for tonight's grievance, for the relationship that ended, for the parent who never saw you, for the friend who did not show up when you needed them most. The second arrow, in each of those cases, is what you have been doing with the first arrow. And the doing, the Buddha was patient enough to teach, can stop. Stopping happens by noticing, in the moment, that the second arrow is being fired. Recognition is what does the stopping. By feeling the small motion in the chest as the resentment gathers, by watching the mind reach for the old story, by recognizing the familiar face of the person you have been blaming for years, rising in the mind again as you sit there. The recognition is the practice. The recognition does most of the work. Once you have seen the second arrow being fired, there is a small space in which the firing can pause. In that pause, something can shift. The shift may be small at first. A breath that arrives a little easier. A loosening in the jaw you had not realized was clenched. A softening of the constant low background tension in the shoulders that had been your normal state for so long that you had stopped noticing it. Forgiveness, in this teaching, is not what you do for the person who hurt you. Forgiveness is what you do for yourself when you stop firing the second arrow into a wound that has been already there for years. The Buddha was very precise about this. He asked his students one thing only: to stop adding to their own suffering. Whether they ever felt warmly toward the people who had harmed them was a separate question, and one he left open. The person who hurt you may be alive. They may be dead. They may be unaware of the whole long history of what they did to you. They may be sitting in their own life feeling perfectly fine while you are in your bed at night with the wound still open. None of that matters to the practice. The practice is between you and the second arrow. Putting it down has nothing to do with whether they apologize. Putting it down has nothing to do with whether you forget what they did. Putting it down has only to do with the small grasping movement inside you that keeps reaching for the next arrow to fire. There is something else worth saying about this practice. For the person who has been carrying a particular hurt for a very long time, the hurt may have become part of how you understand who you are. You may have built parts of your identity around the wound. Letting the second arrow fall may feel, at first, like losing a piece of yourself. This is normal. The grief of putting down a long-held resentment is real. What you are losing is the thing the wound has been making you carry, day after day, for years. The version of you that emerges underneath the wound is still you, simply lighter. What is left, when the second arrow has stopped being fired, is you without the resentment. A version of you that you may not have met in a long time. The Buddha did not promise that this practice would be easy. He told his monks the simile of the saw because he knew exactly how far the practice was being asked to reach. He did not pretend the reach was small. He simply offered the measure and trusted that those who had been practicing long enough could see for themselves where their own daily cases sat in relation to it. For tonight, the practice is small. Notice one second arrow you have been firing this week. One person whose face has been arriving in your mind with hot energy attached to it. one conversation you have been replaying, one injury you have been re-examining, trying to see it again, trying to find the angle from which the other person was wholly wrong. Just notice that the second arrow is in your hand. Notice that you are the one firing it. Notice that the firing can, in this moment at least, stop. The teaching does not require you to feel warmly toward the person who hurt you. It does not require you to call them. It does not require you to write the letter you have been composing in your head for years. It only requires that you put down, for tonight, the small grasping movement inside you that keeps reaching for the next arrow. Tomorrow you may pick it up again. That is allowed. Each time you put it down, the putting down becomes a little more available. Each time you notice it being fired, the noticing arrives a little earlier in the cycle. The first time, you may notice an hour later. The next time, a few minutes later. Eventually, the noticing will arrive at the moment of firing, and the arrow will be put down before it has fully left your hand. Over months and years, the practice becomes the way you live, rather than something you remember to do. When the second arrow has been laid down for long enough, something becomes possible that was not possible before. You can begin to see the people who hurt you as they actually were, not as you needed them to be. They were people limited by their own conditioning, their own pain, their own conditions of arising. They were doing what they could from inside their own lives, with whatever capacity they had. Sometimes that capacity was small. Sometimes it caused real harm. But it was the capacity they had. And asking them to have been someone they were not was its own kind of second arrow, fired across the years at a person who never had what you needed. The arrow flew over their head and landed in your own chest, over and over, for as long as you kept firing it. This is the deeper release. The release of the people in your life from having to have been who you needed them to be. A final laying down of the burden you have been carrying on their behalf. The years of disappointment that someone could not give you what you needed have been their own second arrow, firing every time you saw them, firing every time you remembered them, firing every time you imagined how things might have been if they had been different. When the arrow stops being fired, what remains is a much quieter relationship with the actual person they actually were. A person you may know about, in the Buddha's own community, walked all the way through to this release, and the story of how he did it begins with a clean cloth and a single phrase. In a town called Rajagaha, at the edge of the marketplace, there is a potter's shed. The roof is low. The walls are mud brick. The floor is bare earth. A pile of unfired clay vessels stands in one corner, waiting for the kiln. The potter's wheel rests in another corner, the leather thong that drives it loose on the floor. A traveller has been given permission to spend the night here. The traveller is a man named Pukusati. He has come a long way to be in this town. He was once the king of a small country far to the north, a friend of King Bimbisara of Magadha by correspondence, though the two of them had never met in person. A year ago, Bimbisara had sent him a letter describing a new teacher who had appeared in the world. The letter contained the basic outline of the teaching: the four truths, the path, the marks of awakening. Pukusati had read the letter many times. Something in him had recognized what was being described in a way that nothing else in his life had ever been recognized. Without consulting his ministers, without arranging a successor, Pukusati had given up his throne. He had cut his hair. He had put on the yellow robe of a wandering monk. He had taken up the bowl. He had set out on foot for the country where the teacher was said to live. The journey had taken months. He had never once seen the man he was going to find. He carried only the description in the letter and the certainty in his own body that this was where he needed to go. He has reached Rajagaha tonight. He has not yet found the teacher. He has been told that the teacher is somewhere in the area, staying perhaps in one of the bamboo groves outside the city. Tomorrow he will continue looking, walking the roads, asking the lay people, following whatever thread he is given. Tonight he is tired, and the potter has kindly let him sleep in the shed. He has eaten the small portion of food he received on alms round. He has spread his outer robe on the bare earth. He has settled into his evening meditation. A second figure arrives at the shed. Another monk, by the look of him. An older man with a calm face and an unhurried way of moving. He stops at the doorway. He asks Pukusati, very politely, whether there is room in the shed for one more for the night. Pukusati looks up from his meditation. He sees a stranger in the doorway. A monk like himself, by the look of the robes. He does not know who this person is. He has never seen this face before. He gestures to the empty space across from him. "Welcome, friend," he says. "The shed is large enough for the two of us." The older monk comes in. He sets down his bowl. He spreads his robe on the earth across from Pukusati's. He sits. He arranges his legs in the meditation posture. The two of them sit in silence for a long time, as the light leaves the doorway and the shed grows dark. After some hours, the older monk speaks. "Friend," he says, his voice gentle in the dark, "may I ask under whom you have gone forth? Who is your teacher? Whose teaching do you follow?" Pukusati is glad to be asked. "There is a teacher, friend," he says, "a man named Gautama, the Buddha, the awakened one. I have left my home country to find him. I have not yet seen his face. But I have heard his teaching from a friend who heard it directly, and the teaching has changed my life. When I find him, I will ask him for full ordination." The older monk receives this answer quietly. He does not say what he could say. he does not announce who he is. Instead, he asks Pukusati another question. Friend, would you like to hear a teaching? A teaching that this Buddha you are looking for has given. Pukusati would be glad to. What follows in the shed through the rest of that night is one of the deepest teachings the Buddha ever gave. The teaching on the elements. The discourse called the Dhatu Vibhanga. The Buddha walks Pukusati through what a person actually is, at the level of the elements that make up the body. Earth, water, fire, air, space, consciousness. He shows him, step by patient step, that none of these is what a person finally is. A person is the place where these elements come together for a time and then come apart. The teaching is one that Brahmin philosophers had argued about for centuries. The Buddha gives it to a stranger in a potter's shed by the light of a single oil lamp, as if it were the most ordinary gift in the world. Pukusati listens. Something opens in him as the teaching unfolds. Each element is named. Each is shown to be subject to change. Each is shown to be unable to bear the weight of being what a person ultimately is. The teaching moves on through perception, through feeling, through the way consciousness arises in dependence on the senses. Pukusati's mind keeps pace, following each move. He has been hungry for this teaching his whole life. He had not realized, until tonight, just how hungry. Somewhere in the middle of the long teaching, Pukusati understands something that has nothing to do with the content of the teaching. He understands who the teacher is. The man across from him in the dark of the potter's shed, the man he had been calling friend all evening, is the teacher he has crossed countries to find. He stops the older monk gently. He prostrates on the earth between them. "Lord," he says, his voice unsteady, "please forgive me. I addressed you as friend. I did not know. I should not have presumed." The Buddha waits for him to finish. He does not lift Pukusati up immediately. He lets him have the moment of his prostration. Then he speaks the small, ordinary words of a teacher accepting an apology that did not really need to be made. "Friend," he says, using the same word Pukusati had been using all evening. The wholesome confession is acknowledged. The way you addressed me was the way one fellow practitioner addresses another. It was not a fault. Now sit. The teaching is not yet finished. Pukusati sits. The teaching continues. By the time the first light begins to come into the doorway of the shed, Pukusati has gone deep enough into the teaching that the Buddha will later say of him, he attained the Dharma eye that night. He saw, for the first time, the truth the teaching had been pointing toward. When the teaching is done, Pukusati asks again to be ordained as a full bhikkhu. The Buddha tells him gently that to receive the full ordination, he must first obtain a proper bowl and a proper robe in the way the rules prescribe. Pukusati bows. He leaves the shed at first light to go and find the things he needs. Later that day, on the road, a runaway cow strikes him, and he dies before reaching the bowl maker. When the Buddha is told, he speaks of Pukusati with great warmth. He had attained the third stage of awakening before he died. He would not return to this kind of birth. The teaching given in the shed, the few hours between two strangers in a potter's hut, had been enough. Sit for a moment with what happened in that shed. Pukusati met a stranger as a stranger. He did not need the stranger to be more than he appeared. He offered him the space across from him, shared the silence, and when the stranger asked him a question, he answered honestly. The stranger met Pukusati as a sincere fellow seeker. He did not need Pukusati to recognize him in order to give him the deepest teaching he was capable of giving. He did not announce himself. He did not test Pukusati. He simply began to teach, in the form the moment allowed. Recognition, when it came, arrived in its own time. Pukusati recognized the Buddha somewhere in the middle of the teaching, through the quality of what was being said, not through any introduction or display. By then they had already been together for hours. By then the teaching had already begun to do its work. The teaching continued in the same shape it had been before. The only thing that changed was how Pukusati addressed the man across from him for the small remainder of the night. This is what meeting each person as they are looks like in practice. You meet the people who arrive in your evening as they are arriving, not as you would prefer them to be, not as you fear they might be, not as you hope they will turn out to be once they have shown you more. As they are, in the doorway, in the chair across from you, in the message they have just sent you, in the silence at the dinner table, and you let your meeting with them unfold from there. The reverse is also true. The people who arrive in your life will meet you as you appear to them. They will not always know who you really are. They will not always recognize the teacher in you, the wisdom in you, the kindness in you. The Buddha did not need Pukusati to recognize him in order to teach. You will not always need the people in your life to recognize you in order to give them what is yours to give. Recognition, when it comes, will come in its own time, or it will not come at all. Either way, the teaching can be given, the kindness can be offered, the presence can be brought to the room. There is one more layer to this story, and it concerns the long view. Pukusati and the Buddha had never met in this lifetime. They had, however, met countless times before. The Buddha taught, in a series of discourses called the Anammataga Sayutta, that the round of birth and death has no discoverable beginning. Through the unimaginable length of that round, every being you will ever meet has, at some point, been your mother, your father, your child, your friend, your enemy, your teacher, your stranger in a shed. The Buddha offered this teaching as a way of softening the grip of the present configuration. The point was practical. It was meant to ease how the listener stood in their current relationships. The person you cannot stand at this moment was once the person who held you when you cried as a child. The friend who left you was once the friend you left, in some other life you cannot remember. The parent who failed you was once the parent you failed. The configurations rotate. The roles trade places. The grievance you are currently holding has been held in the other direction by you, in some other configuration, at some other time. Your hurt remains real, in this configuration. The friend who passed through your life, passed through your life. The harm that was done was done. What the long view offers is a wider frame around the same wound. The people in your life have stood in many other relationships to you, in beings you cannot remember, and they will stand in many more after this one. The current grievance is one frame of a very long film. The frame is real. The film is also real. When you meet each person as they are today, you also meet them across the long arc of their conditions and yours. The face in front of you is the current face. Behind it, in the depths of cause and condition, are countless other faces, countless other meetings, countless other lives in which the two of you arranged yourselves around each other in different ways. You do not need to remember any of those. You only need to feel, in your own body, the loosening that comes when this current configuration is no longer the only thing in the room. This is the deepest medicine the early Buddhist record offers for the question of why some people stay and others pass through. Some stay because the present conditions hold them close to you. Some pass through because the present conditions only place them on your road for a stretch. Neither the staying nor the passing is the whole story of who they are or who you are or what the two of you have ever been to each other. Each meeting is a frame in a much longer arrangement of causes and conditions, meeting itself, rearranging, meeting again. Tonight, if there is one person whose absence is heavy in your life, let the long view enter the heaviness for a moment. They are not gone in any final sense. They are simply not in this configuration with you anymore. The heaviness is the weight of the present frame, not the weight of the whole film. And tonight, if there is one person whose presence is difficult, let the long view enter that difficulty too. They are not the whole of who they have ever been to you. They are not the whole of who you have ever been to them. The current configuration is one moment in a very long mutual journey, and the moment can be met as it is without having to be more than it is. Settle a little more deeply into wherever your body has come to rest. The shoulders, the jaw, the small place at the base of the neck where the day's tension always settles. The people you have been thinking about as you listened are still there in the long arrangement of your life. The ones who walked all the way to the edge with you. The ones who could not follow. The ones whose hatred you no longer have to take in. The ones whose absence was its own kind of teaching. The ones whose presence has been steady in ways you may not have thanked them for. You are met by them as you are tonight. You meet them as they are tonight. The configuration of who is beside you and who has slipped past does not need to be the whole story of who you are. For these few hours, you have been in the company of people who lived a long time ago and learned a few things worth keeping. A man being attended at the edge of his life by a friend who knew exactly what to say. A queen who answered a king's question honestly at first light. An elephant in a quiet forest looking after a tired teacher. A stranger in a potter's shed offering the seat across from him to whoever might come. Let your breath find its slowest natural shape. Let the body have the rest it has been asking for. You are held in something larger than the present configuration.